Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint Aragorn from Middle-earth strategy battle game. If you like the channel and you'd like to support me, my Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video. So this is the finished miniature that we're going to be working on today. It's Aragorn from the plastic Fellowship of the Ring set, although he does look a little bit more like Tom Savini in the face. But it's a cracking little miniature, other than my one gripe, which is the back of the coat. But we'll come to that a little bit later on. So first of all, we're going to start working with some Citadel Caliban green. I'm going to use this to paint his coat. A little bit that I didn't really like too much about this was the back of his coat, where it kind of flares out behind him. I love the idea of it, but it just seems to be so, I don't know whether it's badly sculpted or badly cast. You can't really tell what's going on with the coat itself. Ordinarily you'd have sort of like ripples in the material, sort of like quite smooth ripples, but these all seem to be very angular and jointed, and there's no real obvious way in which the ripples and the flow of the coat is going. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Baneblade brown. I'm going to use this for his boots, his chest piece, and a few other little areas too. There's quite a few little bits you can paint with Baneblade brown, because we're going to be using a few contrasts to get some different leather effects on there. You can see from this how much Baneblade brown we've just used. Now I'm going to use some Vallejo Black to do his trousers. So nice quick layer this one, which is lucky because it's pretty much all off screen. But you just paint his kecks with a bit of Vallejo Black and on to the next layer. So next up we're going to be using some Citadel Iron Hand Steel, and this is going to be to get the sword and his belt buckle with a nice smooth coat of metallic. Next up we have some Citadel Cadian Fleshtone. I'm going to use this to do his skin. It's a nice quick layer this one. Next we're going to use some Citadel Dryad bark. We're going to use this to do his hair. Another nice quick layer here. Next is going to be some Citadel Thondia brown. We're just going to be using that to do his bow. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Wildwood. This is going to be to do the leather on his front there. You've got this kind of skirty bit going round, joins onto his top underneath the coat. It's going to give this a nice coat of Wildwood. Also going to add a little bit to the quiver on his back too. Next up, some Citadel Snakebite Leather Contrast. And we're going to use this to do his boots and also the, well, it looks like a rolled up blanket on his back. We're going to do this with the Snakebite Leather too. We're now going to use some Citadel Black Templar. I'm going to use this to do the, not really sure what it is, some sort of like sling bag maybe or something like that, which is strapped across his top there. So So just going to do that with a little bit of Black Templar, then move on to the next colour, which is going to be Citadel Reikland Fleshshade. So just going to use this to do all of his skin. Next, Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm going to use this just to do all of the silvery metallics and also his hair and the bow. With those dry, we're going to start working on the colours again. I'm going to start with Cadian Fleshtone, start working on his face. So you want to be using this to get the colour back onto his cheeks and his nose, his forehead. Making sure that you're highlighting all those areas that be catching the most light. Getting those on there and leaving the shade in the recesses. And then the areas where he would have a little bit of shade, like under his cheekbones. Those kinds of areas. I will be adding a little bit of a, almost like a goatee to him before we're finished. But for now we're just working on the skin. Next colour we're going to use is a little bit of Citadel Kislev Flesh. I'm going to use this to highlight the Cadian Fleshtone. So you want to cover like the top 50% of most of those highlights. Think about where the light's catching it and where it's going to be the brightest. And you want to be adding the Kislev Flesh to those areas. Next up, a little bit of Caliban green. I'm going to start reapplying colour back to his coat. So we're going to do this leaving the shades in the recesses. Now it's ever so slightly out of order this. As I work on the first two layers for the whole miniature and then go back and do the final highlight at the end. Because I was just looking at the cloak and the cape and all that kind of stuff on him and wondering whether or not it'd look any good with just the two layers on it. So I tried it with two layers, didn't like it, wanted that third layer of highlights on there, so I came back to do them later on. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Citadel Orruk Flesh with the Caliban green. I'm going to start to highlight that coat, thinking about where the light is catching it as always, and adding it to the top edges and layers of that. Got quite a nasty join in his coat there from where he's been put together. You can fill that if you want to, but as it's just a little plastic one, it probably won't be getting used very often. I just left it as it was. I'm going to use some Citadel Thondia brown on the face there to do his moustache, and also where it goes down and almost joins, almost like a goatee but not quite, and he's got a little bit in the middle there. Does look a little bit more like Tom Savini than Viggo Mortensen, I think. I'm also going to use this on the skirty part of his leather underneath the coat. You've also got some little bits on his chest too. So just highlight the areas that be catching the light, and we can weather those a little bit as we go on. Now I'm going to add some Citadel Rackarth Flesh. We're going to start adding some highlights and scrapes to this leather. So always do horizontal strokes on the verticals, vertical strokes on the horizontals. I keep the brush strokes about 90 degrees to the angles that you're painting. And that will give it that rough look as though the leather's been scuffed and rubbed against stuff. Adding those little rough edge scrapes to it. Also using this to paint the little bits tied around his boots too. Like so. We're going to move on to a little bit more Citadel Rackarth Flesh, and we're going to start adding the final layer of highlights to all of these parts. Don't want to do as many highlights using this colour, just a few little bits here and there to lighten up those highlights and make it look a little bit extra scraped in certain parts, like the edges of that skirty bit, and some of the larger creases as though the creases have been well formed and well scraped. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Thondia brown, mix a little bit of Citadel Balor brown in with the Thondia, and with that we are just going to highlight the bow. So thinking about where the light's going to catch it, you're going to do this on the top edges, about 50% of the bow, like so. I'm going to use a little bit of pure Balor brown. I'm going to use this to do the first highlight on the boot. So you want to be doing it a little bit rough. You don't want the highlights to be smooth on the boot. You want them to look like it's a bit scraped or a bit chafed. These top little fold over parts we're doing a little bit lighter and a bit more substantial with the Balor brown. But the rest of the boot you mainly want to make it look like it's a bit more scuffed. I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo German Grey just to highlight the kind of sling bag round his front there, and also the trousers coming out from underneath that leather. So think about where the light is going to be catching those on the top edges of the creases and things like that, and leave the normal black in the recesses. Now we have Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm just going to use this to do some edge highlights on those black areas where we've just put the German Grey, just to make the details in those stand out that little bit more. Working on his hair next, we're going to go for Citadel Dryad Bark. We're going to paint this as close as you can to when they have the kind of strands of hair coming down that you have moulded on. The plastic on this one isn't too hot, so you don't have quite as good a definition in the hair, but you can get those lines in quite nicely if you're very, very careful and use a thin tip brush. I'm going to mix a little bit of Citadel Mournfang brown with the Dryad bark just to make a nice lighter brown colour. We're just going to do this to highlight his hair. So again, as always, thinking about where the light is going to be hitting the hair, you want to be trying to highlight those areas so that you're getting that nice kind of shine on certain parts, the lighter bits on certain parts, and it'll be darker in the others. Now we're going to add a little bit of Citadel Iron Hand Steel to the blade and just get that nice shine back on it. I was going to use this on the bottom of the quiver too. You've got a little buckle, I think it is, or something on his waist too. We're going to use it on that there. I'm going to use a tiny spot of Vallejo Model Air Chrome. Just going to use this to run along the edge of the blade and give that nice little extra bit of shine that you'd have with a sharpened edge. Do a few little highlights on the blade, on any of the other little metallic areas too. So you're now going to go use a little bit of Vallejo White on his eyes. So you're going to drag the brush from near the nose to the outside of the head so you don't get any of the white onto the bridge of the nose. We're now going to use a little bit of black just to do a spot in each of the eyes. Like so. As always, tweak the eyes. If you need to move the pupils or repaint them, do so. Just get the eyes looking where you want them. So here I am going to use a little bit more Orruk flesh mixed in with the Caliban green and Orruk flesh mix, just to give it one final highlight. And what I've done is I finished the miniature there after I've done the eyes, and I was looking at it thinking it does need another highlight to it. I was seeing if I could get away with one less highlight to the miniature, but I didn't think that the edges and details stood out quite enough, so came back to it. So adding this just to the top edges and the top creases, just to make those details stand out, and the flat part of the cloak at the back where it's got all those weird angular bits, I tried to make that look as flowing as I possibly could. So now I'm going to use some Thondia brown with some more Rakarth fleshing, lighter than the previous mix, just to do a little bit of extra scuffing on all of this brown leather. I'll link up a few leather videos throughout this one, so if you want to see how to do some different colours and different styles of leather, you can do. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Kislev flesh and Citadel Balor brown mixed together, and just do one final highlight on these lighter coloured boots and also on the belt that he's got tied around his waist there. And also do this on the roll mat or the blanket or whatever it is he's got strapped to his back beneath the bow and the quiver as well. With those couple of extra highlights, the miniature is finished. Really pleased with how he turned out. Still a bit frustrated with the back of that coat though, because you can't really tell what's going on at all. There's not really any detail. But cracking miniature, another one done for the Fellowship. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of all the social media, link below. Thanks very much. Like the channel, enjoy the content, and you'd like to support me, my Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.